the Baen Free Radio Hour.
On the podcast, broken, icy hearts of comets, and the lead-eating zombies expelled from a Nevada rare earth mine for bad breath and worse manners. Plus, we continue with the complete audiobook serialization of Larry Correia's Son of the Black Sword. All right now. Welcome to the Baen Free Radio Hour podcast. It's an honor to have you along. I'm Baen Senior Editor Tony Daniel. This time we continue our interview with John Ringo, Kacey Ezell, and Christopher L. Smith, talking about their new book, Gunpowder and Embers, a great new post-apocalypse sort of Western martial arts adventure novel. It's really good stuff. Also sitting in on the interview is Baen publisher Toni Weisskopf. This is part 2 and the conclusion of a most excellent 2-part interview, so that's coming up. And we continue with the complete audiobook serialization of Larry Correia's great high fantasy novel, Son of the Black Sword. Now here's the news. Welcome to the Baen Free Radio Hour podcast. It's an honor to have you along. I'm Baen Senior Editor Tony Daniel. This time we continue our interview with John Ringo, Kacey Ezell, and Christopher L. Smith, talking about their new book, Gunpowder and Embers, a great new post-apocalypse sort of Western martial arts adventure novel. It's really good stuff. Also sitting in on the interview is Baen publisher Toni Weisskopf. This is part 2 and the conclusion of a most excellent 2-part interview, so that's coming up. And we continue with the complete audiobook serialization of Larry Correia's great high fantasy novel, Son of the Black Sword. Now here's the news. We have some excellent free fiction at the Baen.com website right now. This is The Red Sea by Mercedes Lackey and Cody Martin. The story is set in the world of their upcoming novel, Breaking Silence, which is the sequel to last year's book, Silence, by the way, and it all takes place in a small town in Maine beset by some rather dark forces, maybe having to do with dark elves. But our heroes are pushing back, and we put up this free fiction to give you a taste of the world of the books and just to give you some great stories to read, and this is one of them. At sea, when Wanda is left behind in Silence, Maine, while her friends are enjoying the weekend of camping and LARPing, the young guy thinks her weekend is going to suck. Instead of playing D&D, she's walking along a lonely stretch of beach all alone. Or at least she thought she was all alone, but there are some strange things lurking under the surface of Silence. And the waters off its coast may be haunted with things. Find The Red Sea by Mercedes Lackey and Cody Martin at Baen.com right there on the front page. It'll stay available online on its own webpage, but when it comes off the front page, you can also download it in our free ebook collection from Baen eBooks called Free Stories 2020. You can get that from the website, and it is available in perpetuity. So check that story out. You won't be sorry. This is part 2 of a 2-part interview. Part 1 is available on last week's podcast. Want to welcome John Ringo, Kacey Ezell, Christopher L. Smith, and hey, Toni Weisskopf, Baen publisher, is here as well. Welcome all to the podcast. Hello, folks.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Well, let me introduce everyone. John Ringo, Toni Weisskopf's the publisher here at Baen. Boss lady. John Ringo is the creator of the Pozzoline War series, a New York Times best-selling series with over 1 million copies in print. It contains A Hymn Before Battle, Gus Front, When the Devil Dances, and a lot of other books written by John along. More books was in the series co-authored with Michael Z. Williamson, Tom Kratman, and Julie Cochran. John has penned the Council War series. He created the national best-selling military adventure.
This is going to take the entire podcast. Hi, I'm John Ringo, and you're not. Moving on. I mean, when you get into the anthologies, when you get into the spin-offs, when you get into the collaborations, I mean, I don't know. And Toni, do you know how many books there are? because I've been trying to count for years, and I keep coming up with different numbers. I mean, it's like at 56, 58.
I think it's 1, 2, 3 many at this point, John.
Yeah. Well, like Kevin Costner says in Dances with Wolves, they are like the stars. All right. We'll skip all that crap. He is the author of the Black Tide Rising series recently and the Monster Hunter Memoirs, a series with Larry Correia. And he's a veteran of the 82nd Airborne and knows a lot about Army crap. Kacey Ezell knows a lot about Air Force crap because she is a USAF helicopter pilot who writes science fiction, fantasy, alt history, and horror fiction. Her first novel was a Dragon Award finalist in 2018, and her stories have been featured in Bane's Year's Best Military and Adventure Science Fiction compilation, and she won one of those as the best story of the year in 2018. So that's good, and she's just been popping up all over the place. She's an up-and-coming, great new writer that we're happy to support, as is Christopher L. Smith, who is not a native Texan by birth, but feels like that's his home. As soon as he could get there, he went there. He met a wonderful lady who found him to be funny, charming, and worth marrying, and he began writing fiction. His short stories can be found in anthologies like the Black Tide Rising anthology, Forged in Blood, and The Good, the Bad, and the Murk, among others. He's co-written 2 novels. A solo urban fantasy novel is currently under construction. Wait a minute. No, that's not this one. His cats allow his family and 3 dogs to reside with them outside of San Antonio. And now at booksellers everywhere is Gunpowder and Embers by John Ringo, Kacey Ezell, and Christopher L. Smith. All right. Why are there dragons? and maybe talk about Jasmine's and her growing up with this horrible Lord Schilling.
There are dragons.
There are
because
dragons because
John
I wanted
is very
dragons.
kind to me. Because John is my friend, and John knows that I love dragons.
Originally, didn't I? I had dragons originally.
You did, but they weren't. They weren't an integral part of the story, as you initially described it to us. You let me bring in a dragon tamer because I love dragons so much.
True.
I think originally they were much smaller, and we kind of played with it a little bit to get them bigger.
Yeah.
And this also let us put a dragon on the cover. So.
Right.
Yes, that was the real reason I did it.
Cover, by the way.
Tony, that was exactly the reason. It was all, honest to God, the dragons were all marketing. People are not very interested in insects. I'm interested in insects. Dave Freer is interested in insects. Nobody else is interested in insects, okay? We are the only 2 people in the world who give a damn about insects, all right? But everybody loves dragons.
And the occasional entomologist.
So I went. Right, sorry. And the occasional entomologist. Kathy Smith, right.
Yeah, Kathy Smith is pretty into him.
But in general, people just aren't that into insects. So I went, well, it needs something else. Oh, I'll throw in dragons.
I'd like Chris to talk about the cover, the scene that the cover illustration illustrates. Can you explain that one?
Well, it's a stealth mission, obviously. It's been kind of fun since we saw the cover reveal at LibertyCon last year. That has kind of become an inside joke hashtag with the group of friends that I have. Is the stealth mission hashtag? It's still stealth if everyone's dead. Various plays on that. But
the death of Soleimani was a stealth mission.
Right. Exactly.
That's our
he never knew it was coming, and no one knew. Everybody who needed to know it was coming didn't find out until too late. Yeah. If no one can report you, it's still stealthy.
So there's a scene in the book where the characters have to they come upon a conflict in progress, And they really, the conflict has very little to do with them. It's in the way, and they've got to get through it. And during the course of that conflict, Jasmine, who is the dragon tamer character, and she's, she has this dragon character, Quetzalith, that, is her companion. And she finds out that in the course of this conflict, as is often the case, some innocent kids get hurt, and that pisses her off. And when she gets pissed off, things burn. And so they're tiny little quiet, let's slip across the river and keep our business, keep our minds on our own business.
Avoid any
becomes
problem.
a conflagration.
Not burn the town down.
I kept thinking.
Definitely not burn
I kept
the town.
thinking when Mr. Bigglesworth gets angry, people die. When I'm reading this,
right.
when Casey and I were sitting there putting it together, I'm just giggling because it totally reminded me of Dr. Evil, and I could just see Jasmine's look on her face, like, right, okay, that is what's going to happen now, and just kind of stalks over, walks out, raises her fist, calls down fire, and then comes back and looks at the guys like, what?
Well, and it all goes back to that concept of Jasmine as, she's she's ruled by instinct, right? She's ruled by, this is wrong. This feels fundamentally wrong in my gut, and I'm going to do what I have to do to redress it. And in her mind, dead is redressed. So there you have it.
Totally within character. It was perfect.
Yeah. She's her. Yeah, I don't know where I was going with that.
One of the things I'd like to talk about, can you pronounce the name of the dragon again?
Sure. It's and I deliberately put it in the text so people would know. It's Quetzalith. So like Ket-za, like pizza, and then lith, like lithograph.
Quetzalith. Okay.
Quetzalith.
I've never known how to pronounce
speaking with a list.
One of the things about Quetzalith, while we were writing it, there's a scene that's still in the book that is kind of got truncated, where they're getting on a riverboat. And at the time, Quetzalith was among the missing. And there was originally it was a fairly long, complex thing, and Quetzalith eventually showed back up, and there was a lot of conflict. But they actually, Jasmine actually got on the riverboat, not entirely voluntarily, and sort of left without Quetzalith. And I said, there's no way that character would do that. It was completely false to the character. And Casey and I went back and forth about it a little bit. Not a lot. I mean, it wasn't like an argument or anything. I said, Casey, is it okay if I mention your daughter's name? Casey?
Sure.
Well, anyway,
yeah,
I said, Quetzalith is your daughter. And she went, oh, Casey would never leave her daughters behind, ever. Under any circumstances whatsoever, there is nothing that you could get her to do that. And in the same way, Jasmine could not leave Quetzalith behind, because Quetzalith was, to the extent that Jasmine is an alter ego for Casey, and I'm not saying that Casey is crazy or anything, it's, completely ruled by instinct, but to the extent that character is an alter ego, Quetzalith was an alter ego for her daughter, and that's certainly how she wrote her. And so when that character was in some way forced, in some way persuaded to get onto the riverboat and leave without Quetzalith, I went, nah, she'd never do it. It would be an impossible decision for her. So we rewrote it so that Quetzalith shows up before they have to get on the riverboat. And there is an initial argument, then it sort of gets muted when Quetzalith shows back up.
Yeah.
But what I had said that, then we were at a different Liberty Con, and your daughter, somebody said something, and she made a particular face. And I tried to get her to do it again. It was when we were eating pizza in that storm. And I tried to get her to do it again because when she made that face, she looked exactly like the freaking dragon. And that's why I was trying to get her to do it. Because she had, when her face goes up in a V, she looks like a freaking dragon. So when I said, because that argument was later about leaving Quetzalcoatl behind, when I said that Jasmine couldn't do it because that is your daughter, you know, and I said the name, what I meant was you literally wrote her as her.
Yeah. No, and you were right, and that was and the scene works much better, you know, the way that it finally ended up being, you know, coming together. So, I mean, that's been one of the things that's been really valuable for me about this whole process is, you know, the opportunity to not just bounce ideas off of Chris, who, you know, he and I have been doing that basically since the beginning of our friendship several years ago, but to have John's perspective as, you know, a more experienced author who, you know, has gone through these drafting and editing iterations and can kind of see the currents moving within the story before I'm able to, just because I don't have that experience yet. That's Chris and I have talked about that before, how we've both found that super valuable.
Oh yeah, most definitely.
You're welcome.
Yeah, thanks, man.
So let's talk about that cool riverboat a little bit, because they let's see. Basically, the quest goes from Wyoming to Kansas City to Pittsburgh, and this riverboat's on the Ohio, then, right? It's the Long Tall Sally.
I want to say the river's on the Missouri.
Oh, okay, and that's how they get there.
Yeah, they board just outside of Kansas City, and then they're they, you know, eventually get onto the Ohio River. But yeah, I'd actually have to look at our map to be sure.
Well, Jasmine's uncle is in Pittsburgh, so yeah. Anyway, go ahead.
I was going to say that riverboat actually makes another appearance in the Give Me LibertyCon anthology, which I don't know when that's scheduled to come out, but that's the anthology from Baen where in tribute to Uncle Timmy, who's the founder of LibertyCon, and Chris and I were invited to participate in that super cool project. And I was at LibertyCon with actually Toni Weisskopf, and I was like, Toni, you know, what should I do for this? And she goes, why don't you give us a gunpowder story? And I was like, oh my gosh, I could tell the story of how Jack, the you know, pirate king, ends up on this riverboat. And so fans of that whole sequence should look for that anthology coming sometime in the future from Baen. So.
One aspect I'd like to...
Yeah, it's July 2020. I was really pleased to see more of Jack and his true love.
Not at all. I have a quote that I use all the time when I'm doing panels about characters and about writing, which I stole from Hemingway, which is good writers create, great writers steal. And when people are thinking about writing, when you're trying to figure out characters, it is totally okay to take people that you know and file serial numbers off if they're good characters. Everyone has done this. Every writer in history has done this. It is not anything which is unacceptable to do. In fact, it's the way that you get good characters, because the best characters are characters from real life.
Yep.
And so in the riverboat, the guy who owns the riverboat is, I think he's only referred to as Jack, but he is somebody that is also part of this group that we hang out with. And he has been, the term is not red-shirted. In this case, he was red-shirted, giving something away. But giving away a big...
No, he
big
wasn't. Spoilers.
but the term is Tuckerization, and where you take somebody and you only vaguely file the serial numbers off and use them as a character. And he has been Tuckerized in, I think, as many Bane books as Joe Buckley. But he is not always redshirted. Like Joe Buckley is always redshirted.
Well, there's a reason for that. He's
but at this
he's
point,
quite
it's just
literally larger than life.
Oh, you're talking about Jack? Yeah, Jack.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, Jack.
It takes a lot to kill Jack.
He is both metaphorically and literally larger than life.
Yep.
And if you actually go into his background and like Jack's memoir from like when he was 17 until he was 22 would fill a couple of volumes.
Easily.
Yeah,
it would
for
be
sure.
the Hunter S. Thompson's mixed with I don't know who's like Ragnar the Magnificent, Eric the Red, or something, and Hunter S. Thompson combined into one would be Jack's.
Yeah, he is somebody that you guys had to tone down to make believable for the book.
Can you just tell us who this guy is so that you don't have to talk around it? He probably doesn't care, right?
Who, Jack Clemens?
Oh no, he doesn't care. His name's Jack Clemens. He's currently a senior manager in social media for one of the largest for a big marketing firm that focuses on the gun industry. So he does social media for like large gun companies. And I can't really get into which contracts they have, but they have contracts with large gun companies, and so he's the social media. His team is the social media voice for gun manufacturers, and
So basically, he has a dream job. He gets guns for free just for talking about shit.
And
Spoiler.
a while back, there was this whole thing about he was kind of head over heels for a particular pop singer who shall remain nameless in this podcast.
You shall remain nameless.
And the character the character that is his unrequited love in the on the riverboat is in no way, shape, or form has anything whatsoever to do with the modern, extremely skinny female pop singer.
Correct.
Who has to go through a
Nothing
bunch of
at
boyfriends a
all.
lot.
Who goes through a bunch of boyfriends a lot.
This is the thing that I like about fiction, right? Is that you can make the stories come out the way they should come out. And this feels right because this is how it should be. This is how it is in some other universe where there are, in fact, giant ants eating our electricity. I'm very happy with that.
Tony, did you ever hear the joke about what would happen if they actually got together? Because
I did not.
The whole deal is she gets involved with the guy, she breaks up with him, she writes an album about the relationship. And that album would be called Crushed. That album would be called Crushed.
Jack is a big man.
He's a large
Jack is a
human being,
huge guy.
So there's a certain amount of, we had so much fun working on this book that we hope that that some of that fun spills over and the readers get that sense of it. It's such a fun world, and the characters are so meaty and so relatable that we hope that everybody else gets out of it what we put into it. Chris, what was your experience like working with these two?
Oh man, equal parts terrifying, frustrating, and amazing at the same time. And not frustrating in terms of butting my head against a wall because of this. It was more along the lines of three creative people really wanting to push an idea that they like. It's like, oh man, I think this would be really, really great. And then having two other people go, yeah, but let's do this. It's like, but I'm stubborn. I don't want to change my idea. And then I see what's on the page and I go, oh God, that is better. So, that's where the frustration on my part came from. Just because it was like, I'm working with two people who are very, very good at this. And, watching it take place was the amazing part, because I honestly think after looking at all this, as it was all kind of coming together, and Kacey, I know I'd said to Kacey a couple of times, it was just, oh my God, how are we going to pull this off? And looking at the finished product, like, oh my God, we pulled this off. I think this is a very cohesive narrative where, when you look at it in terms of editing and you're looking at certain pieces here and there at the same time, it's like, man, does that fit? I don't know if that fits. And then you go back and look at the whole and you go, that fits. This is actually pretty cool, And I also get to, I give John a hard time because, way back when, years ago, I said, hey, John, do you ever think about writing a Western? He goes, oh, man, I would never do that. I would never write a Western. It would be like Ghost on horses. And so for the last couple of years,
I've write a Western. I would never write a steam. I would never write a Western.
Exactly.
I think that I guaranteed I would never do. I would never write a Western. I would never write a steampunk novel. And by God, as God is my witness, I swear to God, I will never, ever, ever write in the zombie universe. And I will never do porn.
Too late.
I get to thumb my nose at John every time I see him and go, neener, made you write a Western.
So we should say that, yes, for people who are fans of Westerns and fans of Louis L'Amour, you will find things to like in this book. There is very much a Seven Samurai sort of feel to this.
Growing up, I read Louis L'Amour over and over and over again. From the point of view of my input, there's a very Louis L'Amour feel to it because it's the only Western that I know.
Well, one of the things that makes it work, it seems to me, is that you come up with some really good bad guys, and I think you should mention them before we close out. Especially when you have the cultists, you have Ariel, who was one, and we talked about them a little bit. Maybe talk about that drug sort of experience they have with the Gants. Also, we have the execrable Lord Schilling. Who Jasmine's basically escaped from, who's treated Jasmine abominably.
I'm going to say this, he is absolutely in no way whatsoever based on my former boss.
I'm glad you clarified that, Chris. Thank you.
Well, he's trying to create like a medieval kingdom in the middle of the Midwest, the West. Talk about the bad guys, in other words, a little bit.
Whenever you're going to have a breakdown in society, you're going to have, obviously, a power vacuum, right? And so it seemed logical to us that you would have these sort of petty warlords that would sort of rise to fill that vacuum, at least in their local area. And so we kind of just picked one, and his character kind of came to light. We sort of developed his character in conjunction with Jasmine's character. And one of the things and John specifically gave me the job of talking about this and defending this if it ever comes up, so I'll address it here. One of the things in Jasmine's background is that she's a sexual assault survivor. And initially, when we were going through this, John was like, Kacey, that's dangerous waters right there. Because there's a lot of, with like the Me Too movement and everything like that, nobody wants to be accused of creating characters that are only interesting because they're victims. My counter to him is that Jasmine isn't a victim. Jasmine is a survivor, and that is a nuanced difference. Distinction, but it's real and it exists, and it's important that sexual assault survivors, people who've been through that traumatic experience, it's important to me that they see themselves represented in fiction, just as everyone needs to be represented in fiction, and so we worked very hard to present Jasmine as someone who had this horrible thing happen to her in her backstory, and yet it didn't define her. It became just something that had happened to her, something that, that she drew strength from by saying, I have survived that, I can survive this. And it made her a stronger person, a stronger character, and someone with a stronger will to move forward and to continue surviving. So in order to create that background for her, we had to, have someone who would do that. And so kind of the first horrible thing that we knew about this Baron Schilling was that he was a rapist, which is a pretty horrible thing. And I had to say his character kind of grew out of that. Yeah.
I was going to say, he's not your standard jump out of the shadows, grab you, tear your clothes off kind of rapist. He's a much more
he's a trap,
which is not the standard, by
sinister.
the way. Yeah.
He's
in his mind.
I mean, he's subtle. He's manipulative, and in his mind, he's doing the right thing. But what he is someone who is grooming, younger girls until they become either of age, or we kind of imply that they weren't, to be his
well, we said she was
concubines,
14,
his
so
mistresses, whatever. That's true. That's true.
Yeah, he's an abuser of his power.
Absolutely.
Correct.
And that's where, right. And so that's where we started from with his character. And then we kind of went, okay, so here's the situation that we have a person who is an abuser of power, and what do they do with that? How would they create this? And, from there we came up with this concept of someone who wants to be an autocrat. He wants to be able to believe in the divine right of his divine right to rule, right? So a lot of the world building and the color of, what his place looked like, what his moves are as far as, trying to monopolize the rail, what remains of the rail system in that part of the country, how he's going to interact with these other petty kingdoms and warlordships that sort of spring up in the absence of legitimate power. All of those interactions were based on that idea of him as he is someone who is an abuser of power and is a power addict and wants more and will never not want more.
There's some very nice resonance there with the ants, who are also all about power, right? They're literal power devourers, and you also get to set up contrasts between people who don't take advantage of the situation to abuse the power, and that's nice too.
One of the things I really liked about the feel of the book is that it's a really hard world. It's really tough, and yet there are people that are acting with honor in it, even in such a tough world.
Right. Yeah, that was important to us.
Well,
and because neither. Go ahead, John.
No, you go. Go.
Oh, I was going to say, neither John nor Chris nor I is a real big fan of like the whole sort of grim, dark, everything's going to shit concept. You saw it in John's Black Tide Rising series as well, that, eventually we're going to rebuild and eventually things are going to get better. Humans are just too damn resilient for that not to be the case. We're either going to be wiped out completely or we're going to rebuild. It's just a matter of how long is it going to take. And so, we, all three of us have done difficult things in this life and been through difficult things, like everyone. And I think one of the outlooks that we shared that made this partnership possible is that what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. But there's always hope, and there's always a reason to do the right thing.
The nature of this book, I really did not want it to be horrendously dystopic. I could have included a lot more dystopia to it, because that environment would tend to be fairly dystopic. But that was not the feel that I wanted to go for. I wanted to go for a feel that was more positivist. Because even in that situation, there would be people who would be working very hard to try to restore a non-dystopic future.
Right.
And there'd be a lot of people who would be trying to make things worse, like the Baron. And so, but just because there is evil doesn't mean that evil automatically triumphs. In fact, the history of humanity has been that evil has become less and less. Now we went from about 1.5 billion people in the Iron Age to 2.5 billion people in the Industrial Age to 8 billion people. So it's really easy to look at the world and go, the world is so bad in the current situation. And yet, if you look at the world objectively and compare it to history, what you're seeing is a much smaller amount of evil, but 8 billion people were. So we've probably got we've got the equivalent of the population of the Iron Age that is really, really horrible people. Okay? You know, it's like if everybody in the Iron Age were really, really, utterly horrible people. We've still got that. We've got 750 million people that are really, really horrible among 8 billion.
Yeah.
So
we outnumber them.
The world has just gotten a lot better, and human beings have become better people. It's hard for us to see that, but if you look at South America in the 1950s versus South America today, South America today looks terrible. It looks god-awful. Compare it to the 1950s. Compare it to the 1800s. It's so much better today, just in terms of people being more decent to each other than they used to be. Look at Africa in the pre-colonial period. Look at it in the colonial period. Look at it present day. Africa looks like a basket case. Look in the 1800s what Africa looked like. Oh my God! The advancement has just been amazing. So
I mean, calling attention to the behaviors that I think that's a useful thing that literature can do to give us those heroes, to help us go through these incredibly difficult times. Hopefully not as difficult as giant ants coming through interstellar rifts, but yes.
I don't know. There are days I prefer.
Hey, we have a large hadron collider underneath Texas and rednecks all over the place, so don't rule it out. I'm just saying.
All right.
Do we want to talk about anything else about the book or plans for the future?
Well, we have 2 more books planned right now. The one thing that we didn't mention was, and I don't know if we want to get into this, but we have this sort of light versus or a light in the darkness or a flame in the darkness theme kind of running through everything, where if that flame represents the hope of the hope of freedom, the hope of a world where you don't have the autocrats running around and creating their petty kingdoms, but where you actually have a functional society where the rule of law is paramount, and everyone is free and gets a fair shake. We didn't really go into that. I don't know if you guys want to, but that's kind of where our titles come from. With Gunpowder and Embers, it's if the flame is that hope is maybe buried and maybe smoldering, but it's still there. It's not out. And when it meets gunpowder, a conflagration will result. So.
Actually, there's one other thing I want to mention too. The conflagration and the embers, you see that on the cover as well, and we have on the cover representations of 3 of the characters, and I just want to say that all 3 of these are going to be really easy to cosplay, so I would love to see them at a convention.
Easy cosplay. It's an easy cosplay.
I may or may not have completely picked Jasmine's outfits based on what would be comfortable to wear in Atlanta in the summertime.
That works for me. I think corsets are lovely. The vest for the Windfist also looks great. And Chuck is a cowboy, so Love to see all of these out there.
Who was the cover artist, Toni?
The cover artist was Dave Seeley. Did
That's
a fantastic job. Yeah.
And it is
Great cover. I love the cover.
I would be remiss if I didn't. Yeah, it's so beautiful. I'm so flattered and pleased, and I'm gonna need to figure out how to hang it up on my wall somehow when I finally stop moving around the world.
Well, I'm going to be the dead gunslinger. I could just lay there. All right. So,
a pair of dog tags hanging out of your that would be amazing.
That's right. And little key.
It's kind of like
Here you go, Chuck. Do something.
or Uncle Ben.
Yeah, like the people who run up and like pretend to be Batman's parents and just lie down dead in front of every Batman cosplayer. That would be amazing.
Yeah.
Well, it's an incredibly fun book, and it really however this alchemy came together, it works. The book is Gunpowder and Embers by John Ringo, Kacey Ezell, and Christopher L. Smith, and it is at booksellers everywhere. Thank you, John, Kacey, Christopher, and Toni Weisskopf for being with us and talking about Gunpowder and Embers.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you for having us.
That was part 2 of a 2-part interview. Part 1 is available on last week's podcast. Now we continue with the complete audiobook serialization of Son of the Black Sword by Larry Correia, Book 1 in the saga of the Forgotten Warrior. After the War of the Gods, the demons were cast out and fell to the world. Mankind was nearly eradicated by the seemingly unstoppable beasts, until the gods sent the great hero Ram Rowan to save them. He united the tribes, gave them magic, and drove the demons into the sea. But as centuries passed, the descendants of the great hero grew in number and power. They became tyrannical and cruel, and their religion nothing but an excuse for greed. The people rose up, and the surviving royalty and their priests were made casteless, condemned to live as untouchables. The age of law had begun. Ashok Vidal has been chosen by a powerful ancient weapon to be its bearer. He is a protector, a member of an ancient military order of roving law enforcers. No one is more merciless in rooting out those who secretly practice the old ways as Ashok. But Ashok isn't who he thinks he is. And when he finds himself on the wrong side of the law, the consequences lead to rebellion, war, and perhaps transformation. Now here is the latest entry in Larry Correia's Son of the Black Sword.
Epilogue. The desert sun beat down on Grand Inquisitor Ormond as he sat in a wicker chair along the road between the capital and the Inquisitor's dome, waiting patiently. He'd come alone, without even a slave to hold his umbrella or wave a cooling fan. Regardless of the season, even the busiest caravans tried not to travel during the hottest part of the day here, but there was a line of men on horseback making their way from the capital. If Ormond hadn't already been certain who it would be before, the silver armor gleaming in the sun confirmed it. From this distance, he couldn't make out too many details, but the riders had far superior vision. Some said, better than a hawk, so they certainly recognized Ormond. The one in the lead broke off and galloped in his direction, his warhorse kicking up a furious plume of fine white dust in its wake. Ormond remained in his chair, comfortable and unafraid, as Lord Protector Devadas approached. For a moment he was concerned that the Protector was just going to run him down, but the horse reared as Devadas pulled on its reins and forced it to stop only a few feet away, close enough to throw sand on his robes. "Speak, Inquisitor. Let me hear your voice." Of course, just because he was wearing the Grand Inquisitor's mask didn't make him the Grand Inquisitor. It was wise to be suspicious. "Hello, Devadas. Always a pleasure to see you again. Ormond." He dipped his head just a bit. "There's no pleasure here." Could it be? It appears that all of the stalwart protectors of the law are leaving the capital. We are. The judges have lost confidence in the loyalty of my order. A shame. I believe you had something to do with that. Armand waved one hand dismissively. My obligation is to protect the governing caste from all who would do it harm. The judges judge. I only provide facts, and the evidence suggested that some protectors have violated their oaths. If it is any consolation, I believe the vast majority of you to be men of impeccable integrity. My recommendation said as much, yet the capital's faith in your order was still shaken. I'm going to personally see to it that faith is restored. By killing the traitor Ashok, I take it. I've sworn that I won't return to this city until he's dead. Every last one of us will be pursuing him to the ends of the world. Devadas glanced around the open desert suspiciously. What a strange turn of events. You just happen to be waiting here as we pass, and you appear to be all alone. A happy coincidence, Oman said as he looked across the vast expanse of nothing. As if men of his importance often sat alone in the desert for no reason. Yes, I am all by myself. Say what you will, there are no ears here except for ours. Then you received my message. Speaking of ears, how is your man? Not quite so useful to me, horribly disfigured. Devadas pushed on. I've been investigating you, Omand Vokan, and what I found is most curious. Clandestine meetings with high-status members of every house. Bribing archivists to tamper with the histories and conspiracies to manipulate judges. You've been a busy man, pulling all those strings. I must admit, I do enjoy politics. You must, since you're planning on overthrowing the government. Oh? That was why he'd placed himself here. Armand had suspected Devadas was aware of some of his crimes, but he was unsure of which. If Devadas had known that he was behind Ashok's escape, then he probably wouldn't have stopped the horse from trampling him. You've mocked the law enough. On the contrary, I'm the law's fondest supporter. Everything I've done has been to strengthen the capital's control of the houses. We both know they have too much autonomy, and such freedom causes disorder. It was a pointless raid that cost your father his ancestor blade, and thus cost you your birthright. I would stop such frivolity. So you've distorted history to promote genocide. Then non-people are a stumbling block to progress. Religious fanaticism is an infection that can never be cured, and it lives on in the tissues of the casteless. Until they are cut away, the infection will continue to spread. You've known this to be true, since I told you where to find your old master, Ratul. If this necessary cleansing has the added benefit of making the houses more reliant upon the capital, where is the harm? What's to keep me from taking your head right now? Devadas put one hand on the hilt of his sword. Oman smiled beneath his mask. As usual, a warlike man underestimated his abilities. Just because he was primarily skilled in rhetoric and manipulation, those quick to violence never realized Omand could crush them like a bug if he felt like it. Luckily, such direct action was seldom necessary. Calm yourself, Devadas. He'd been observing these protectors for years, and he knew that Devadas had too much pride in his own achievements to ever be completely devoted to the letter of the law, and thus could be manipulated. It would be a shame if something horrible was to happen to that librarian of yours. The young man's face darkened. Your clumsy attempt at silencing the archivist was embarrassing. Don't waste my time pretending that Radha is just another witness. From the pained expression you're wearing, you thought your relationship was a secret. I truly do see everything that happens in this city. You actually love her. I always thought you were too ambitious for such entanglements. My congratulations. She will make a fine bride once you both decide to end your obligations to your orders. But I tire of dancing around the issue. I know where you've hidden her. If I die, she dies. If my dark counsels are exposed, then she dies. Simple. Perhaps it wasn't that simple, because Devadas drew his sword. "Wait!" Omand ordered with such force that ripples travelled outward through the sand. Devadas's horse shifted nervously as the ground beneath its hooves moved. Omand held up one fist, indicating he had a chunk of black steel clenched in it, and wouldn't hesitate to use it. "I was a witch hunter long before I was a bureaucrat. If you harm her, nothing in the world will stop me from taking your head." Omand had misjudged the man, and thus picked the incorrect move for this game. But he still had other plays. Any action against me will be seen by the judges as proof that the order has been corrupted. The protectors will be ruined, the members purged, and you will be remembered as the commander who caused it all. Surprisingly, Devadas laughed. "You truly are the spider, like they say. Are people really stupid enough to blunder into your web so easily?" "Normally, yes." Omand tilted his mask back and studied the protector with new appreciation. He was smarter than he acted. "I sense you have a different proposal." "I do." Devadas pointed his sword at Omand's chest. "I suspect you care nothing about the casteless and their false gods, except that they're an excuse for you to consolidate power. You want to return to the Age of Kings, in all but name. In those days, the tribes united to push the demons into the sea. Now you want to do the same thing to the casteless. The events that bring this about are irrelevant, as long as, when it is over, you're in control." "You are more politically astute than I gave you credit for, Devadas. It is truly a shame about your house dying. You would have made a fine Thakur. I'll make a better king." For once, Omand was the one taken by surprise. "I believe you overestimate my goals." "Call the office by whatever title you want. Governor, minister, I don't care. But you must realize you'll need one. Since I've been investigating your sabotage of the archives, it's given me the opportunity to read up on how things worked in the prior age. There was usually one man in control, sometimes a figurehead, sometimes not. But if you intend to consolidate power, there must be a single ruler for the people to look to. It can't be you. No one will follow a man who has never shown his face. The first king was chosen because he was the hero who beat the demons. You have found your threat. Now you need your hero." "An interesting proposal. I will take your offer to the councils." "No, you won't. We both know who runs the web, and I'm sure you've got no shortage of conspirators who each think they're the best man for the job, ready to put a knife in my back. You want the great houses to bow to the capital, but whichever of your pet judges you choose to be your figurehead has to come from one of those houses, leaving the rest jealous or suspicious. I have no house." Omand was impressed by the logic. Your only loyalty has been to an order which has been fair and equal to all. You're born of the first caste, but without any of their usual entanglements that entails. The warrior caste would have far more respect for you than any man of the courts. An argument could be made that you would be the best choice." He was practical enough to admit that Devadas also had a charismatic charm, and his rugged looks would do well on posters and coins. Though I know that's where the power truly lies, I've got no stomach for managing bureaucracies. That's for men like you, Ormond. I was born to rule, and that's what I intend to do. Very well. This had been a more fruitful meeting than Ormond had hoped for. But what about the destruction of the casteless? Rebellion is coming to all of the houses one way or the other. It's been in the air too long, and recent events will only make it worse. I don't believe in the old foolish superstitions about where the casteless come from, but I think exterminating all of them is unnecessary brutality. Let the rebellious hang, and the rest will fall back into line as usual. It turned out they were both ambitious, but Devadas still had some measure of humanity. Luckily, Ormond didn't. Of course. As long as I reach my political goals, I don't care what happens to them. I'm happy to let the obedient casteless live, he lied. I intend to crush the rebellion, and when I return, triumphant, we can either be allies or enemies. You will have plenty of time to prepare your people to welcome me back. I believe this may be a long campaign. With Ashok joining the rebels, for once they're actually a threat. Does he know of my part? Impossible. Only a loyal few knew of Ashok's fabricated orders, and none of them would have talked. So, you believe he has willingly joined the rebels? Ashok was the closest friend I've ever had. I know him better than anyone. There's never been a man born with a greater single-minded devotion to the law. They say he's without compassion or mercy. But they don't realize Ashok believed he was doing lawbreakers a favor by ending them. People think it was because of the sword. But that's not what made Ashok that way. It was his belief, his certainty. He just is. So, while he was rotting in that cell, pondering on all those who wronged him, if he turned that devotion to something else, some other task, he'd be just as certain, just as merciless, only now there would be no law to restrain him. Devadas trailed off, then shook his head sadly. No, Inquisitor. My order isn't just searching for him as some political show to satisfy the judges. I have to kill my brother, because I know that Ashok is the most dangerous man alive. For the first time, Ormond wondered if he might have inadvertently unleashed something terrible into the world.
This has been an Audible Studios production of Son of the Black Sword, Saga of the Forgotten Warrior, Book 1. Written by Larry Correia. Performed by Tim Gerard Reynolds. Producer, Mike Charzuk. Copyright 2015 by Larry Correia. Production copyright 2015 by Audible Inc. Audible Studios is a division of Audible Inc.
That was another entry in the complete audiobook serialization of Son of the Black Sword by Larry Correia. And that's it for the podcast. Thanks to Audible.com and to podcast theme composer Ruth Judkowitz. And the graffiti-like remains of an orange-blue bruise of a sky that's protected us from yet another kinetic strike from those nasty aliens pretending to be asteroids. Thanks, Sky. Plus praise, plaudits, and gratitude to Baen publisher Toni Weisskopf and to John Ringo, Kacey Ezell, and Christopher L. Smith, authors of Gunpowder and Embers. Please join us next time here at the hammering heart of science fiction and fantasy, and keep reaching for the stars.